And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action.
US Vice President J.D. Vance was at the European Security Conference in Munich on Friday, just after an Afghan refugee rammed his car into a crowd in that German city and killed a mother and a child. He warned them, if we're talking about security, how about the enemy within? And he said what so many European politicians for decades did not want to say or to hear.
And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration.
Joining me from London is author, columnist and TV commentator Esther Kraku. Esther, great to see you. I feel that we're both under false pretenses here. I mean, son of immigrants, talking to someone who's an immigrant herself. But is Vance right that he says here are European leaders, you know, they're afraid of their people, they're censoring free speech, they're trying to freeze out democratically elected parties which oppose mass immigration?
Well, absolutely. I mean, all you had to do was look at the reaction of the leaders that he was speaking to know that he hit the nail on the head. The thing is, at least in Britain, for example, for the last 25 years, the British public have consistently voted for lower levels of immigration. But if you look at the priorities of our political leaders, it seems to be the complete opposite. I mean, immigration under Boris Johnson was on steroids. We'd need 10 new cities just to accommodate the number of people that moved into Britain in the last 2 years alone. In mainland Europe, it's the same conversation. I mean, in places like France and Germany, you've really now had sort of cities that have become ghettoized and sort of mini communities from people that have come from overseas that don't often share the values of the native-born citizens. And no one is talking about that. In Germany, for example, the AfD, which is actually second in the polls at the moment, you have other mainstream parties basically taking a vow to not work with them. In what other democratic situation do you have parties refusing to work with other parties just on the basis that they have such disdain for the people that vote for them, even though the message is loud and clear? So JD Vance really ruffled a lot of feathers with his speech at Munich, especially because the leaders in question thought they were going to hear about sort of the US's plans for Ukraine and how that involved European cooperation. And he hardly mentioned Ukraine. I mean, it was basically a footnote. And then they were even more irate when they realized that the Americans were not interested in involving the Europeans because they figured that if they wanted to actually end the war in Ukraine, they would have done so already. So they're kind of just moving at the beat of their own drum. And it's really unfortunate for European leaders because now they're scrambling in Paris to try and see what they can make of a situation that in many ways has been led by their own negligence and their obsession with the wrong priorities and certainly not the priorities of their voters.
And what do you think of the idea about where he attacked the Europeans for being in fear of their people and censoring them? He gave examples like this one.
This last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law.
How much truth is there in his criticism?
Well, there is a technicality there that does ring true. So in England and Scotland, and England in particular, we have a 150-meter zone around abortion clinics where legally any behavior that can be seen as intimidating can be arrested. You can be arrested for. And in Scotland, it's 200 meters. So if you happen to live within 200 meters of an abortion clinic, for example, the argument is that if you're seen in conducting any activity that can be seen as intimidating, you could face, a call from the police. So, for example, if your window is open and you're on your knees in full view of an abortion clinic, or you're saying something or whatever, then that could potentially fall foul of the law. And we saw a prominent example of a man who was arrested outside of a clinic in Bournemouth, an abortion clinic in Bournemouth, for praying silently. And that was apparently seen as intimidating. I mean, I suppose the alternative is to have a mariachi band outside of abortion clinics because that seems to be a preferable alternative.